The Luftwaffe laughed when they first saw the P-47 Thunderbolt, slow, bulky, and seemingly outdated. But that laughter turned to panic when the sky exploded with 8 50 caliber machine guns. This is the true story of how one American aircraft turned the tide against the German Air Force and earned its place in World War II legend. Script March 2, 1944. Skies above the Moselle River near Trier, Germany. At 14,000 feet, a formation of Luftwaffe Bf-109Is is vectored toward an incoming group of American fighters. Over the radio, one German pilot chuckles. The fat ones again, big slow targets. They'd seen them before, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Hulking, sluggish beasts, flying bricks compared to their nimble Messerschmitts. The joke, among German squadrons, was that the Americans must be using them to haul cargo. Then, a spark in the clouds. A single P-47 peels away and dives, not away from the Germans, but directly at them. Before they can react, the air ignites. 8 50 caliber machine guns roar to life, chewing through aluminum and flesh with mechanical indifference. One Bf-109 bursts into flame, spiraling downward in seconds. 2 more scatter, forced to break formation. The radio falls silent. Something had changed. This wasn't the easy prey they remembered. This wasn't the same plane, or the same pilots they thought they could laugh at. So what happened? How did a bulky American fighter, once considered a clumsy failure, become a nightmare for the Luftwaffe? Why did German pilots, even aces, begin to fear the very sight of the Jug? And what made this aircraft not only deadly, but virtually unkillable? The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is more than a tale of engineering and tactics. It's a brutal reminder of what happens when arrogance collides with overwhelming force. And by the time the Germans stopped laughing, it was already too late. When the P-47 Thunderbolt first rolled out of Republic Aviation's assembly lines in 1941, it was nothing like what American pilots expected or wanted. It was massive. At over 10,000 pounds empty and nearly 20 feet long, it was the largest single-engine fighter of World War II. Compared to the sleek British Spitfires or the nimble German Bf-109s, the P-47 looked almost laughable. Even among US ranks, it earned an ironic nickname, the Jug. Officially short for Juggernaut, but the shape reminded many of a milk jug, wide, bulky, and anything but graceful. Designed around the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a monstrous 18-cylinder radial powerhouse, the P-47 was intended as a high-altitude escort fighter. But in its early iterations, it struggled to meet the demands of air combat. Pilots complained it was sluggish in tight turns, poor in climb rate, and nearly useless in close-range dogfights. German aircraft like the FW-190 could out-turn and out-climb it with ease. The early P-47s, operating in Toulon, England in late 1942 and early 1943, often returned from missions having failed to even engage the enemy, let alone shoot anything down. To the Luftwaffe, it was just another bloated American experiment. They saw it as a big, slow-moving gun platform, something to be avoided if possible, mocked when convenient. German pilot briefings emphasized its lack of agility. Radio intercepts from the time are filled with casual dismissals. Not a threat, clumsy, too slow to follow. And for a while they were right. But what no one realized, not even the Americans themselves, was that the P-47 wasn't meant to fight like the enemy. It was designed to fight differently. And when commanders stopped trying to make it dance with Messerschmitts and instead let it smash them, everything changed. The turning point for the P-47 didn't come from a redesign. It came from rethinking how to use it. In mid-1943, Allied commanders began to rethink air combat doctrine. They realized the Thunderbolt's massive size, weight, and ruggedness weren't weaknesses. They were unmatched advantages when applied with the right tactics. Enter boom and zoom. Instead of turning and twisting in classic dogfighting maneuvers, P-47 pilots were trained to fight vertically. They climbed to high altitude, often over 30,000 feet, then dove at incredible speeds toward enemy aircraft, unleashing their guns in a single blistering pass. With the momentum from the dive, they zoomed back up to altitude before the enemy could react. This tactic suited the P-47's strengths perfectly. Its turbo-supercharged R2800 engine gave it unmatched performance at high altitudes, allowing it to outdive and outrun nearly every German fighter. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 or FW 190 couldn't keep up in a dive, and trying to follow a Thunderbolt down often resulted in engine failure or structural damage. Even worse, the P-47 could take hits that would shred lighter planes. Another breakthrough came with the introduction of drop tanks, external fuel tanks that extended the Thunderbolt's range dramatically. Suddenly, the P-47 could escort bombers deep into Germany, filling a critical gap in long-range air cover that had plagued Allied bombing campaigns. No longer did B-17s have to fend for themselves once the fighters turned back. The Luftwaffe took notice. By late 1943, reports began to shift. German pilots noted the high-speed, high-altitude attacks that seemed to come out of nowhere. These weren't sluggish milk jugs anymore. They were fast, ruthless, and well-coordinated. And as more experienced American pilots entered the fight, the Thunderbolt's kill ratios began to rise. The P-47 wasn't evolving. The tactics were. It didn't need to be nimble. It needed to hit hard, fast, and vanish before the enemy could retaliate. And in this role, the Thunderbolt became nearly untouchable. By early 1944, it was clear. The joke was over. What began as a punchline in Luftwaffe chatter had become a shockwave cutting through the heart of Germany's air defense. The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't need finesse. It had firepower, overwhelming, unmatched, and terrifying. Its signature weaponry, 8 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, synchronized to create a cone of destruction. These guns transformed the Thunderbolt from a heavy escort into an airborne chainsaw. Each gun could fire over 750 rounds per minute, unleashing a combined fury of 6,000 rounds per minute. At full burst, a P-47 could shred a fighter-sized target in seconds, often before the enemy even realized it was being fired upon. This wasn't just quantity. It was calculated lethality. The 50 caliber round, heavy, armor-piercing, and high velocity, was originally designed for anti-aircraft and light vehicle use. Fired from the air, in concentrated streams from 8 guns, it tore through fuselages, engines, and cockpits like paper. A single Thunderbolt could turn a German fighter into flaming wreckage with one well-placed burst. But it wasn't just for air-to-air combat. As the war progressed, Thunderbolts took on a brutal new mission: ground attack. Strafing runs against German convoys, locomotives, troop columns, and even armored vehicles became routine. Pilots lined up their shots from low altitude and let the 50 cals scream. The result? Shattered columns, burning fuel tanks, and chaos on the roads. German troops began to recognize the distinctive growl of the P-47's approach and the deafening rattle that followed. They nicknamed the aircraft the fork-tailed Devil's Brother, due to its firepower rivaling even the P-38 Lightning. Some accounts report entire infantry units diving for cover the moment a Thunderbolt appeared overhead. The psychological effect was undeniable. Pilots often said they didn't aim the Thunderbolt. They just flew in the general direction of the enemy and pulled the trigger. Whatever was there wouldn't be for long. Against the backdrop of the European theatre, cities burning, rail lines destroyed, armor in retreat, the P-47 wasn't just a plane, it was a hammer, and those 8 machine guns were the blow that kept falling. If the P-47 Thunderbolt's guns made it feared, its ability to survive made it legendary. At the heart of its resilience was the R2800 radial engine, air-cooled and incredibly durable. Unlike liquid-cooled engines in aircraft like the Bf-109 or P-51 Mustang, the Thunderbolt's engine could keep running even after absorbing serious damage. Punctured radiators didn't mean instant death. It could leak oil, lose cylinders, and still limp back to base. But that was just the start. The P-47 was built like a flying tank. It had armor plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a reinforced fuselage that could absorb incredible punishment. There are countless combat reports of Thunderbolts returning to base, riddled with holes, wings shredded, tail sections nearly detached, and sometimes flying with half an engine. Pilots told stories of being hit by 20mm cannon fire, enough to bring down almost any Allied fighter, and still making it back. In one case, a P-47 returned with over 200 bullet holes, one landing gear destroyed, and its rudder barely functioning. The pilot survived. The plane was patched and flew again days later. This survivability changed pilot behavior. They flew more aggressively. They took risks other aircraft couldn't afford to. They made repeated strafing runs, knowing their aircraft could take hits and still deliver punishment. They dove into formations of enemy fighters without hesitation. The plane had their back. For German pilots, it became a nightmare. Reports circulated of Thunderbolts that wouldn't die. Pilots would empty their magazines into a P-47, only to watch it wobble, then climb away, turn, and return fire. Luftwaffe aces began advising younger pilots, "Don't engage unless you're above it, and don't get hit." But it wasn't just the German pilots who were rattled. On the ground, soldiers grew to fear the howl of the Thunderbolt's engine almost as much as its guns. The aircraft had become a symbol, not just of air superiority, but of Allied inevitability. You couldn't outrun it, you couldn't shoot it down easily, and once it found you, it didn't let go. The P-47 didn't just survive war, it waged psychological warfare, one sortie at a time. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe's confidence was unraveling, and the P-47 Thunderbolt was right at the center of it. Radio intercepts from German squadrons began to tell a very different story. Gone were the jokes and casual dismissals. In their place came urgent pleas. "Zwei jugs above! We need cover! Now! They're diving again! I can't shake him!" Allied intelligence analysts noticed a pattern. German pilots, especially newer ones, were actively avoiding combat with Thunderbolts. Even experienced Luftwaffe aces began cautioning their squadrons. "If it's a jug, don't turn, don't climb, get out." The numbers backed it up. In early 1943, Thunderbolt kill ratios were modest. By mid-1944, they had skyrocketed. In some months, P-47s scored nearly 7-to-1 kill ratios against German aircraft, thanks to improved tactics, better trained pilots, and the ever-evolving Allied air campaign. But numbers didn't tell the whole story. What truly broke German morale was the relentlessness. Thunderbolts didn't just show up once. They returned again and again, escorting bombers during the day, attacking trains at dusk, obliterating airfields the next morning. They were omnipresent, and worse, they were invisible until it was too late. Thanks to high-altitude patrols and boom and zoom tactics, many German fighters were ambushed from above. Survivors described how a group of jugs would appear as specks in the sky, then suddenly scream downward, guns blazing. Before the Bf-109s could react, one or two would already be falling. For Luftwaffe command, it was a tactical nightmare. For frontline pilots, it was psychological warfare. The Thunderbolt had gone from a clumsy underdog to an airborne predator, fast, brutal, and seemingly invincible. And the German war machine, once feared for its precision, was now losing control of its skies. The fear was no longer abstract. It had a shape. It had a sound. And it had 8 50 cals ready to strike. By the end of World War II, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had written its name into military history, not just through firepower, but sheer dominance across every role it touched. Over 15,600 units were produced, making it one of the most widely built fighter aircraft of the war. While the P-51 Mustang often steals the spotlight, The Thunderbolt carried much of the war's dirty work, especially in ground attack and bomber escort roles, where survivability and endurance mattered more than elegance. Its contributions were critical during Operation Overlord, softening German defenses in the weeks leading up to D-Day. During the Battle of the Bulge, Thunderbolts launched punishing low-level attacks that decimated German supply lines and armor. Bridges, trains, columns of tanks, all torn apart under the roar of 50-caliber fire. Pilots who flew the P-47 became legends in their own right. Names like Francis Gabby Gabreski and Robert S. Johnson, who each racked up dozens of kills, swore by its toughness and lethality. Johnson once returned to base with his canopy shredded, his tail nearly severed, and still flying. Even German aces, years after the war, admitted the mistake. One Luftwaffe veteran reflected, "We thought it was too big, too heavy. Then it started shooting down everything. We underestimated it, and paid the price." The Thunderbolt's legacy isn't just in numbers or missions flown. It's in what it represented: overwhelming force, brutal resilience, and a machine designed not to impress, but to win. What began as a joke became a symbol of Allied power. Not sleek, not glamorous, just unstoppable. On paper, the P-47 Thunderbolt shouldn't have worked. It was too heavy, too big, and too slow to turn. German pilots laughed. Even Allied pilots questioned it. But war doesn't reward elegance. It rewards endurance, strategy, and overwhelming firepower. The Thunderbolt brought all three, in spades. It redefined what a fighter could be. Not a nimble duelist, but a high-altitude sledgehammer. It punished anything in its sights, in the air, on the ground, or trying to flee in between. And when it took damage, it didn't fall. It fought harder. The same Luftwaffe that mocked it would later learn to fear it. One German pilot reportedly summed it up best. "It looked like a barn door, but it fought like a lion." In many ways, the P-47 is a reminder of what wins wars. Not flash, not sleek design, but raw power, adaptability, and relentless pressure. It didn't need to turn tighter. It didn't need to be beautiful. It just needed to fly, shoot, and come home. And it did, thousands of times. Today, it's easy to forget the Thunderbolt in the shadow of faster, sexier planes. But among the veterans who saw them fight, and among the enemies who saw them coming, the Jug left a different kind of legacy: respect. So here's a question for you. What other WYT aircraft do you think was misunderstood or underrated? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more true stories like this, where underdogs become legends, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and hit that bell. There's a lot more history they never taught you in school. Thanks for watching.